So today, we're going to crank up the volume on the Middle Ages and explore a world of music that you probably didn't even know existed. Forget the idea of solemn church choirs for a second. We're about to dive into the lively, surprising, and sometimes pretty rebellious world of secular music. Seriously, just think about it for a second. No headphones, no streaming, no playlists. What would the soundtrack to your life even be? Well, for people in the Middle Ages, the answer was pretty simple. It was all around them, live and in person. And that's exactly what we're going to get into in this explainer.
You know, when most of us picture medieval music, our minds go straight to monks chanting in some big stone monastery. And yeah, that was definitely a thing. But it was really only half the picture. The other half, it was loud, it was lively, and it was absolutely everywhere. Okay, so the big term you gotta know here is secular music. All that means is it's music that was not written for the church. It was basically the pop music of its day, songs about things people were actually dealing with, everyday life, love, parties, and just nature itself. And you would hear this stuff everywhere. It was the background music to daily life. You'd hear it in crowded marketplaces, at huge country festivals, at dance parties in the village, and even inside royal courts. And here's the key part. Most of it was never written down. It was passed on by ear, from one person to the next. So who were the people actually making all this music? Well, first up, let's talk about the entertainers for the common folk. You could call them the stars of the street. These performers were called minstrels and jongleurs, and they were the professional entertainers of their time. But they were so much more than just musicians. These guys were jacks of all trades. They were singers, sure, but also acrobats, jugglers, and storytellers, all rolled into one, traveling around to make a living. Honestly, the best way to think of them is like this. They were the living, breathing internet of the Middle Ages. They were how you got the news from the next town over, how you heard the latest gossip, and, of course, how you learned the newest hit songs. All right, so we've covered the streets, but what about inside the castles? If the minstrels were the pop stars for the masses, what were the rich and famous listening to? Well, meet the troubadour. Now, these were a whole different deal. They were the elite singer-songwriters of the medieval world. And unlike the minstrels, troubadours were often nobles or knights themselves. They created these really complex, sophisticated songs, not for money, but for art and for their reputation. And this table really lays out the difference perfectly. You've got minstrels, lower class, playing for the public, just trying to survive. Then you've got troubadours, upper class, performing for lords and ladies, writing about deep, poetic stuff. Oh, and by the way, Germany had its own version called the Minnesingers, who were very, very similar to the troubadours. So what were these fancy songs all about? The number one topic was something called courtly love. This was this very specific kind of dramatic idea where a knight would pledge his entire devotion to a noble lady, who was usually unattainable. His songs would be all about her beauty and his undying loyalty. Okay, so we know who was playing the music and what they were singing about, but what were they actually playing? What did this stuff even sound like? Let's take a look at the hardware. The string section was absolutely huge. You had the lute, which basically looks like the grandfather of the modern guitar. Then there was the viol, which was a bowed instrument, kind of like an early violin. And for a softer, more delicate sound, you'd often hear a harp or a zither. And of course, you need some rhythm and energy, right? Simple wooden flutes and recorders often carried the main tune. A small drum called a tabor kept the beat, which was super important for dancing. And hey, if you were at a big outdoor festival and really wanted to get the party started, you'd bring out the bagpipes. You can't miss that sound. Here are a couple of cool little facts for you. Because so many musicians were travelers, their instruments had to be portable. The sound was also a lot thinner and sharper than what we're used to today. And get this, the strings weren't made of steel or nylon. They were made from dried animal gut. Yeah, for real. Okay, let's get into the wilder side of medieval music now, because it wasn't all just polite love poems and dance tunes. Oh no, it was also the soundtrack for some pretty rowdy student parties and even a little bit of protest. This is one of my favorite parts. I want you to just picture it. Songs about drinking, gambling, all the rowdy stuff, but written in Latin, the super serious academic language of the church and universities. I mean, who would do that? Well, the Goliards, that's who. These guys were basically the punk rockers of the 13th century. They They were these highly educated but rebellious students and clergy members who wandered around writing these incredibly witty, satirical songs that made fun of the authorities and celebrated having a good time. Their most famous collection of songs is known today as the Carmina Burana.
So the big takeaway here is that music wasn't just in the background, it was woven into the fabric of pretty much every social event. It was absolutely essential for dancing. It was the main entertainment during huge feasts. And for a lot of people who couldn't read, it was the main way they heard epic stories about heroes and great battles. So after all these centuries, what's actually left of this incredible, vibrant musical world? What is the legacy of the medieval soundtrack? Well, the hard truth is, the vast majority of it is just gone. See, parchment, the stuff they wrote on, was crazy expensive, so it was mostly saved for church texts and official documents. The pop songs of the people were almost never recorded. So what we hear today are basically brilliant, educated reconstructions by modern musicians. But here's the cool part. The idea of this music is very much alive. You can trace a direct line. It starts with the troubadour, the artist who writes their own poetry and their own music. That concept of a composer-performer catches fire and spreads across Europe. And who's the direct descendant of that tradition today? The modern singer-songwriter. So the echo of this medieval music is still all around us. It's in the very idea of a singer-songwriter. It's in our instruments. The guitar, the violin, the flute, all have medieval ancestors. You can hear it in the rhythms and melodies of folk music. And honestly, it's in the timeless themes of our own pop songs. Love, life, adventure, the stuff we still sing about today. So I'll leave you with this final thought. Thinking about everything we've covered, the poetry, the performance, the artistry, which modern music star do you think really has the soul of a medieval troubadour? It's a fun one to think about. Thanks for listening.